So, welcome to the first ever web chat that we've ever done at the Columbian. My name is Tyler Graff. I'm the county reporter at the Columbian. Because this is our first time ever doing this, forgive us for any sort of technical difficulties that we might encounter. I don't think we'll encounter any, but if we do, we've got an excuse. Joining us today are the 4 candidates running for sheriff. This promises to be one of the most high-profile races of this election cycle come November. One of these 4 gentlemen will become the next sheriff, and it'll be the first time since Gary Lucas won his first election in 1990. So without further ado, this isn't really about me. This is about the sheriff candidate. So I'll pass it over to them, and they can introduce themselves, give their names and their backgrounds, and then we'll go to the questions, most of which have actually come from the public. We have some of our own questions here too, and this is live, so hopefully people out there are watching and they can pass along any questions that they might have via Twitter. And so without further ado, I'll pass it on to Chuck Atkins, and he can introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Chuck Atkins. And first, I'd just like to thank the Columbian for hosting this unique forum, and I'd also tip my hat to the other candidates. This is a tough endeavor to go through, and I take my hat off to them all. I'm a 45-year Clark County resident. Spent 35 years of my career working for the Clark County Sheriff's Office, reaching some of the highest levels within the agency. I was the Assistant Chief Criminal Deputy and a commander of the Special Operations Division for the last 12 years of my career. I have extensive law enforcement endorsements in Clark County to include 4 major police guilds, 150 or more line-level police officers, custody officers, support staff, and of which I greatly appreciate, not to mention hundreds of individual endorsements from community members and businesses.
Cool. Well, let's go on to Ed Owens now.
Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to also thank the Columbian for hosting this unique opportunity. And I'll also extend my appreciation to the other 3 candidates. It takes a lot to put yourselves out there, as we all know, and put ourselves in front of the public in this type of a forum and be willing to serve our community in this way. A little about my background. I served in law enforcement for 23 years. I worked for a few different agencies during that time. My last assignment was with the Sheriff's Office. Prior to that, I was with Washington State University. And I served on the Law Enforcement Council here in Clark County for about 6 years. I'm a retired Air Force combat veteran and first sergeant. I hold a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. I'm very active in my community, and I believe in serving my community and being in service to those that I live with, and am actively involved in multiple aspects within my life. So I'm very glad to be here, and I appreciate this opportunity.
Excellent. Thanks, Ed. How about John?
Hi, I'm John Graser. I'd like to thank the other candidates for coming and the Columbian for hosting this. I've lived in Clark County virtually my entire life. My family's here. My kids are here. I was educated here. I worked for the Sheriff's Office. I retired at the command level. I was the commander of West Precinct, the Clark's Canadian Narcotics Task Force, divisional manager of records, and administrative assistant to the sheriff. So I have a wide variety of law enforcement experiences in my career, ranging from minor traffic to investigating homicides. I've worked on SWAT, and K-9, and special units. So having lived here as long as I have and working for the Sheriff's Office as long as I did, I'm fully aware of the issues facing this community.
Thanks, John. Now, how about Shane?
So, my name is Shane Gardner. I'm the Community Outreach Sergeant for Clark County Sheriff's Office currently. I've been with the agency for 15 years. I've worked 7 years of undercover narcotics. I graduated from Mountain View High School in 1988. I went to Central Washington University and got a bachelor's degree in speech communication, and I joined the Army and served for 4 years with the 101st Airborne Division Air Assault in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. While with the 101st, I had opportunity to go to Ranger School. I was a Spanish linguist while I was in the Army, And when I got out of the Army and came home, I worked active duty special work with the Clarks Community Drug Task Force for 2 years with the National Guard while I went through OCS and became a commissioned officer. In 1998, I got hired by the Sheriff's Office, and I've been here ever since. I'm a Leadership Clark County graduate. I went through in 2010. I'm also involved in my own neighborhood association where I'm the chair and where I fell back in love with our community. And it's the community that we serve, and it's been a rewarding experience to become back to being part of the community, not apart from the community.
Thanks. And thanks to all of the candidates for making the time to come out here and do this. So we'll start with the questions now, and the first one comes from a rather prominent Clark County citizen, Royce Pollard, the former mayor of Vancouver, and he asks via email, our county jail is grossly overcrowded, and our county lacks an adequate number of deputies on the road for our population. What is your plan to address these two critical issues? And I'll throw it over to Shane to begin things.
All right, Tyler, let me just make sure I have that straight. The two parts of that question are lack of deputies on patrol and our jail that's breaking at the seams.
Exactly. Yeah, it's more or less a funding question.
So our funding comes from the Board of County Commissioners. With pressure from the citizens of Clark County, we can increase our funding, but there's a finite amount of money that's out there. We need to prioritize with all the other elected officials on where we fit in with that. And I don't necessarily think the answer to the jail question is by putting more corrections deputy in the jail. I think we need to look at more ways to decrease our jail population. If we have people that are getting incarcerated because they have mental health issues and they don't belong in the jail, then we should look at those folks and figure out a way to divert them from jail, because jail isn't the place they need to be in the first place. We do have a supplemental budget that's been approved by the Board of County Commissioners. Thank you to them for that. We should have 8 new deputies coming on board soon, but even at that, whenever we have an injury or other issue, we are still staffed at one of the lowest in the state, and I think that we need to address that. But it's not going to be the Sheriff's Office that convinces our Board of County Commissioners to do that. It'll be our community putting pressure, saying we want more law enforcement presence.
Do you happen to agree with any of that, John? Does that sound right to you?
Well, I agree in part, but there are some very specific things that we can do. As far as getting deputies on the road, I think the department, which has had the same administration for nearly 24 years, needs to have a completely fresh look and a perspective. We need to do a workflow analysis. And my plan for reorganizing the department right at this point would result in 28 deputies being reassigned to the road, and that's doing it within the existing budget. I know there's been difficulties in approaching the Board of County Commissioners for additional monies in the past, but I've been told that it's reached critical proportions, having a lack of deputies on the road, and my plan will put 28 on the road almost immediately. As far as overpopulation in the jail, I have developed population control strategies, and I've been working on that. I want to expand electronic home confinement. I want to work with the therapeutic courts and diversion programs to lower the population of the jail. And significantly, for the special needs inmates, which include the mental health inmates and the severely addicted inmates, I'm going to move them out of the main jail into a different facility, which will lower the population of the main jail and create more room for the really nasty people out there that need to be in jail.
When you say sorry, I was just going to interject one thing. When you say a different facility, is this a facility that already exists, or would this be something brand new that would have to be built?
No, I'm going to move them down to the Jail Work Center on Lower River Road.
Okay.
Half of that building is currently shut down because of the budget cuts. I'm going to open that back up, and the significant part of my plan to move the special inmates out is that they will be handled and dealt with by mental health professionals. We will still provide the security for that facility, but they will be dealt with on point on a day-to-day basis by mental health professionals. It's a better environment for them, it's more conducive to their recovery, and it does lower the population of our main jail. Ultimately, we need to expand the main jail because we're simply out of room. We had 710 people in there last week, and it was built for 300. I want to move the administration and support services out of the lower floor of the main jail and expand into that. It's a cost-effective solution as opposed to simply building a new jail, which is going to cost about $50 million, which we don't have.
Now, moving on to Ed, is there anything that you would like to do in order to maybe shore up more resources for the jail or for putting deputies on the streets?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Shane was talking about. A lot of this is a funding issue, and that's going to require working with the citizens in this county and the Board of County Commissioners. If we're going to look at increasing our budget and going after more of that 0.2%, which the voters approved several years ago, to help fund deputies, that's going to require a partnership with the county commissioners. There are some things we can do on the short term. I think all of us would agree that when we take office, we'll look at the entire agency and what type of positions might be available for moving. I'm not sure we have as many positions possible to move as has been proposed, but there is some flexibility, I'm sure. If you look at call volumes, there's some great data and research that's put out from the Sheriff's Office, and if we worked with the guilds and we adjusted some of our shifts to match more of the overlap and the call flow for the peak periods of time, that would also help in a short term. Yes, it's great we're going to have 8 more positions, absolutely. But from what I understand, we're not even able to get those positions into the academy until after the first of the year. So when you look at training and you look at long-term deployment, we're looking at 1.5 to 2 years before we'd even see those 8 on the road. So we're going to have to be creative and find some other alternatives to release pressure on the men and women who are doing the job right now. On the jail issue, yes, we do have an overcrowding. We have some great specialized courts here in Clark County, and working with them in order to divert people from our jails into alternative programs is likely one of the best avenues on the short term to reduce some of those population issues.
Excellent. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay.
Now, moving on to Chuck, you've addressed the challenges in reconfiguring the workflow of deputies. And this is something you've talked about in the past. So I was wondering, would you agree or disagree with anything that your fellow candidates have mentioned?
Yes, that was a great first question because it spawned off into a lot of different areas. Speaking directly to the reallocation of deputies within the Sheriff's Office, my 35 years with the Sheriff's Office is current. So I helped build that agency and know strictly where all of those bodies are at. And with the loss of 21 deputies from 2008 to 2010, we are at a bare bones minimum right now at 136. So I would challenge John as to where those 21 bodies are going to come from. We know of the 8 from the commissioners, but where are those other 20 bodies going to come from, and how are we going to move those out of critical spots that we currently are, that they're housed in, to put them back onto patrol? I would also, in reference to the work center, some of these ideas sound great. However, they're going to require staffing to increase the work that will happen at the jail work center as well. My idea at the jail, and a conversation that I've had with the commissioners already, is what does it look like? We know we can't develop a brand new jail or have the funds to build one now, but what we can do is redesign on the platform that we're currently setting how we intake people into our community, into the jail community. And that's what it is a community. And we need to look at, like Shane Gardner had said, how we eliminate a number of those people from the jail. But we have to identify who they really are when they come in and make sure that within the jail we have the resources to handle the drug and alcohol issues, the mental health issues, or the general population criminal issues, and how we move those people and the resources that we provide them while in custody. But just as importantly as we move them out of custody, that we hand them off to the resources they need to keep themselves from coming back 30 days later, and to help relieve some of that jail population overcrowding.
Excellent. So a lot of you mentioned the 8 new deputies. Those were made possible when the commissioners were able to find some additional money to pay for some new hiring for the first time in a number of years. That was made possible because they were able to find a new pot of money, some change under the couch cushion, so to speak. But how sustainable is that? You know, moving forward, because you can do the hiring, and maybe the county has the money to hire these new positions, but to then pay for the new positions moving forward. Can anything change in the future in terms of funding to make those positions sustainable down the road? I guess I'll start with Ed on this.
Okay, there was an article in the Columbian recently which talked about the economic recovery here in Clark County and how retail sales and actually the economy of the county was one of the top in recent years in history. And again, going back to, there are existing mechanisms which go into the general fund, such as the 0.2%, which was approved by the voters. As we continue to grow and our economy continues to grow here in Clark County, those additional resources will come in, which the voters have said that they want to go to law and justice. And it's going to require that we have that type of a close working relationship with the commissioners to see to it that those resources are appropriately allocated, and we continue to add either personnel or resources to the sheriff's office as best we can as we continue to economically develop.
And Chuck, do you happen to agree with that, or you know, are there funding mechanisms that you know of or that you've identified that you'd like to tap into?
Absolutely. One of the platforms that I stand on is we need to really expand our public and private partnerships in the community. And everybody has spoken to community already, and they truly are the ones that drive the change within our private and public entities that deal directly with law enforcement. So we do need to partner closely with them. They're the ones that drive the change through the commissioner's office. I'd like people to understand that the 8 new deputies sounds wonderful, and we love it and we appreciate it, but in a 24-hour-a-day job, 8 deputies is going to really open up about 2 full-time positions, 2 full-time employees when you look at running 3 shifts, sick time, vacation, and overtime. It's just the beginning. The #1 job of the sheriff and of county government is to provide public safety to the community, and we need to focus on that. Other pieces dovetail in and are very important to that, but our #1 priority is public safety. And what do we do to make that happen? As Ed Owens said, the difficulty of getting new people into the academy is a struggle, and it's something that we need to look at and work on, because waiting 18 months for a new person to come in and actually be operational just doesn't help. We need to leverage the resources in the community that have the ability to impact the kind of work that we do, such as ORCA, the Organized Retail Crime Alliance, that deals with shoplifting on a major crime shoplifting spree, on organized crime level. They have partnered with the Sheriff's Office and the Tactical Detective Unit in identifying these organized groups. They have the resources to do a lot of the background work, and then by the time they're ready to hand it over, the Sheriff's Office is able to look at that, develop the probable cause, write the affidavits, and serve the search warrants to take these people off the street. And those are the kind of partnerships that are assisting us at a time when we're at our all-time low in the number of deputies that we have to perform those functions.
Now, Shane, you deal with the community intimately through your role. Do you think there are ways to spend money more wisely, or in different ways that's being spent right now, to tap into community resources as opposed to strictly just focusing on law enforcement and taking down bad guys?
Well, I think the thing that's important to focus on when we talk about this is our job as law enforcement is to keep people safe. And I think that we often in law enforcement do that as a model of catching people that are in bad acts and holding them accountable. But I think it would be better if we could work with our community in a way to prevent people from doing the crime in the first place. I think it's great that we work with ORCA and that we have organizations outside of the sheriff's office that are focused on these regional organized crime or cartels, if you will. But what if we could prevent that crime from happening in the first place? What if we didn't need a victim before we got involved in law enforcement? What if we worked better at mentoring our youth? What if we worked better at prevention activities within substance abuse treatment, and we got people that were going down a bad path with their drugs and alcohol, and we could speak into their lives and work with them and work with the organizations that work into them in a way that would prevent them from coming into jail, starting the whole criminal justice, putting a scarlet letter on their job applications, preventing them from getting gainful employment, preventing them from becoming homeowners and paying taxes in our community. So I think it's great that we are good at law enforcement, but ultimately our job is catching people doing bad things, and I think our job should be preventing people from doing bad things. That we do have necessary people. We have the job out there that's necessary, because we do have people that no matter what you do, they're going to be bad actors. It's a given. That's what our jail's built there with brick and mortar for, because it's guaranteed people are going to do bad things. But not all of them. A lot of them are like that because they don't have mentors, they don't have a hand up, they don't have the resources they need, and I think the sheriff's office can play a bigger role in preventing a lot of these things from happening.
All right, and I'll move on to John. So how sustainable do you feel funding is at the sheriff's office? And, you know, let's say we go through another economic downturn. What can be done to make sure that people feel safe in the community and that we have enough law enforcement officials on the streets that take care of business?
Yeah, well, all of my opponents pretty much digressed from that original question.
It changed focus a little bit, but yeah.
It did change focus a little bit. I mean, I firmly believe in community engagement, but the question was about funding and deputies out on the road. Right now, less than half of the sworn deputies that work for the sheriff's office, 47% as a matter of fact, are actually out on patrol. The rest of them are in administrative and special assignments. My reorganization plan doesn't touch anyone that's actually doing law enforcement work. I'm going to pull people that are in largely administrative assignments to put them back out doing law enforcement work. Currently, the sheriff's office is second to the last in the state as far as the officer to population ratio is concerned, and everyone's aware of that. But Clark County spends 61% of its budget on law and justice. Other counties of similar size, particularly Snohomish County, which we're often compared to because of population and demographics and so forth, they spend 73%. There's a significant difference there. They have 238 deputies. We have 144, I believe, right now. So the question is what are we spending money on here that they're not, or vice versa, to provide that adequate level of funding for criminal justice systems across the board? I don't have an absolute answer to that. I've asked that question with a number of people, and I can't seem to get any firm answers on that. But it's certainly a topic of conversation with the commissioners. With a recovering economy, the sales tax revenues are going to be increasing. We do have 2/10 in place right now. We actually had 2/10 in place back in 1988, and that's been dissolved back into the general fund. If we simply restored that, that would provide another $8.8 million of revenue going into the sheriff's office coffers. Why that was done was a political decision, and I'm not addressing that, but it isn't just a lack of funding, it's a lack of allocating manpower in areas that we need them the most. And the focus should be on getting deputies out on the road. At our 47% rate of having deputies on the road, that violates every modern management theory in the world, which says rule of 60. The ICMA report from the city of Vancouver recommended they follow the rule of 60. That's having 60% of your sworn people out on the street. We're at 47%. I'm going to make that correction.
So in other words, it's a matter of reallocation of existing resources.
Well, the focus with the present administration that's been in place for nearly 24 years has been on management and the process of management. I'm going to have a singular focus on operations, which means getting more deputies on the road.
So moving off of that topic a little bit, which was funding related, I'm going to take a question from Carmen Rodriguez. She asked via email, how different will your community outreach efforts be with our diverse groups such as European and Latino communities in Clark County? And I'll start with Chuck.
That is a great question, Carmen, and appreciate that. We do need to work hand in hand with our diverse community. And as you say, it's not just the Hispanic community, but the Eastern Bloc community, the Asian community. We need to be inclusive. We need to understand the challenges. In the conversations that I've had behind the scenes with different folks from different groups, it's clearly an education process as to what is expected of them, what is expected of us from law enforcement. I hear the terminology on occasion that they're fearful of the police. And I believe if that is truly the case, they're not fearful of the local police that they're seeing now. They're maybe fearful of the police world or the police environment that they came from. And maybe we haven't done as good enough job to educate them as to what our role is, and that we provide a public safety to our community, whether what color your skin is, what religious background you have. We looked as the #1 priority for the Sheriff's Office is to provide that public safety to everybody equally. Throughout Clark County, whether you live here, drive through here, you visit here, when you're in this community, you should feel safe to be able to walk safely through your parks and through your homes. And so we definitely, under my administration, there will be a better connection to those communities, working on citizen advisory boards, etc.
How about you, Shane? Do you feel like the Sheriff's Office could do more to engage those communities?
Well, as the current community outreach sergeant, I'm doing all that I can to engage as many diverse groups that we can, from the business field to the civic leaders to our youth within schools, as well as the Latino community and Eastern European, etc. We have organizations in this community like Leadership Clark County that bring people together, and very seldom do we have somebody from Clark County Sheriff's Office as part of that civic leadership organization, where you build a Rolodex of 35 people that become fast friends and familiar faces that are leaders within their organizations. It's in Leadership Clark County that I met Alex Gordon, who represents the Latino community on a lot of different activities that they're doing, and she's now on the Sheriff's Advisory Board. I forward an application to her so that she can do that. And reaching out with the Latino Community Resource Group and the Latino Youth, LULAC, and some others, I've found that we aren't doing as good a job as we think we're doing. We have deputies that are asking about citizenship when they're in the middle of an assault investigation, and it just absolutely shuts down the victim's demeanor, because now they're worried about getting deported, and that's not what we're there to investigate. I think that there is some retraining that we need to do, and we need to be familiar to build relationships with all of these organizations, these people that are living in our community. We don't need to sit and wait for them to come introduce themselves to us. We need to get out there. We need to be building friendships with them. We need to be building trust with them. There shouldn't be anybody in any of these communities that gets $5,000 worth of equipment stolen from them, and when I give my card to somebody and ask to give it to that individual so that I personally can take the report, they still have so much distrust that they won't contact me. I don't want anybody in my community or under my administration to live in that kind of place.
And John, what do you think about that? I think probably since you were last working in the Sheriff's Office, things have changed quite a bit in terms of training, how deputies are trained. What would you do to bolster outreach efforts to diverse groups from Europe or Latino communities?
Well, I've been reaching out to minority groups across the county pretty intensively for the last 18 months. I've done a lot of work with LULAC and One America. We've been talking to people all over the community. There is an element of fear in minority groups in the community, and we need to take away the fear, and I'm committed to doing that. One of the creative things the City of Vancouver did with LULAC was sign a memorandum of understanding that laid out their relationship, basically. That has never been done with the Sheriff's Office, and I would certainly pursue that. As far as general community outreach, Mr. Gardner does a wonderful job as the community outreach sergeant. I want more community outreach people. Instead of having a law enforcement officer principally doing the community outreach, I want to have community service officers that are civilians that are working on that. We can hire many more civilians than we can one police officer, and we can do even more work in those areas than we've done in the past. So the main point is communication. Establishing lines of communication, building that trust, and working with those communities. And it's not only just to have day-to-day contact with them, but it's to promote more diversity in the hiring in the sheriff's office. We don't have good diversity totals, in my opinion, and I think we need to do more outreach and more recruitment in the minority communities that exist in Clark County.
And what's your philosophy on that, Ed? Or Shane, would you like to say something?
Yes, if I could. John, I just want to address your idea of having civilians do the outreach, because it's important for these communities to be talking with commissioned law enforcement, because it's not the civilians that are out there on the traffic stops. It's commissioned law enforcement. That trust needs to be built with commissioned law enforcement, because we as commissioned law enforcement need to change the way we think. We need to be more empathetic with our diverse community. So you can train up all the civilians you want and ask them to go out and knock on those doors and build those relationships, but it needs to be with the commissioned law enforcement. They're the ones, they need to change as much as the community needs to get to know them, see their familiar face, build that relationship.
Yeah, and I'll let John, I'll let John respond to that, and then I'll move on to Ed.
Well, let me just say I completely disagree. We used to have a community service officer program in the sheriff's office, and we had civilians that wore sheriff's office style uniforms that did outreach in the community, and they were extremely effective. So it isn't a requirement that a sworn police officer be the one doing the outreach.
Do you have a take on this, Ed?
Yeah, I would like to add that, this issue of outreach to the various minority groups within Clark County, this is truly about establishing those relationships. And people have all my opponents have talked about different pieces of it. We have to do a better job. That's going to include a lot of things. It's going to include working with the men and women of the sheriff's office to perhaps give them some better training, whether it's cultural sensitivity, understanding the different cultures, because quite often we don't understand because that's not our background, and vice versa. I do agree. Some of these different groups, where they come from around the world, law enforcement is feared, and those fears are passed down within their generation, or they have their own experiences before they came here. Those are barriers, and until we establish a relationship of trust, and it can't just be the outreach. They do a great job. They get out there and they do what they can to make those connections. But we have one or two people, it's just not enough. It has to be an agency philosophy in which everyone within the agency wants to reach out to the community. We want to establish those relationships so that people learn to trust us. And when we have that level of trust, I think we're going to be able to do a much better job of recruiting people so that our agency reflects the demographics of the population that we serve. We can sit there in some possible areas to focus on the religious organizations within our community, reaching out, working through their networks to try and establish those relationships, letting them get to know us and vice versa. I do believe that we need to have the officers and the deputies heavily involved in this process, because they are the ones that some of those groups don't trust, and they need to learn to trust us.
So I think this is our, unless somebody has anything else they'd like to add to that discussion, I think it's one of those things that I think will pop up quite a bit at various forums and when you're taking questions from the general public, because the community is becoming more diverse. Would anybody else like to add anything?
Yeah, Tyler, this is Chuck. What I would like to say on that topic is similar to what Deputy Gardner had to say. I do think it's very important that it's a commissioned officer that is being educated in the sensitivities of the diverse community and how we deal with them, and not the civilian. There's two sides to that. I'm not saying we shouldn't have the civilian component as well. We could do that, but we are at a time when funding is very tough. And we need to focus on, as I said earlier, our number one priority, and that's public safety. So those dollars need to go towards expanding the enforcement side of our agency and the support groups and the corrections facilities to manage that, while we're looking at what we can do within the community to assist. We do that through training and educating of our officers, and so I just strongly disagree that the focus should be on a private civilian doing that work.
All right.
Well, I couldn't disagree more with that. There's already one civilian working in the outreach department anyway with Sergeant Gardner, and I just don't think we have to dedicate expensive, highly trained police officers to solely a outreach role. We can spread that around. Of course, every department or every deputy needs to do community outreach. It's part of their job anyway, but focusing and specializing on certain aspects of community outreach can certainly be done by well-trained civilians, and we can get 2 for 1 for the cost of a deputy and expand that even further.
I guess I'd say something there. How do you have accountability when you have volunteers doing this sort of work? Would that get in the way of the work that you foresee them doing, or how would accountability work with volunteers?
Well, they report to either a precinct commander or a sergeant, but it's all in their training. I mean, we trained them up before. They did a phenomenal job, not only in community outreach, but in their crime prevention activities. It was a very successful program, and it was eliminated because of an arbitrary decision at one point by one administrator. I think that was a huge mistake. Instead of having one sergeant doing community outreach for the entire department, I would love to have 4 or 6 community service officers out doing as much, if not more work, and then some. But there is accountability.
Tyler,
yeah.
If I could. So this is what I think is important, is that when somebody's in trauma or drama, it's not the time to be building the relationship, and that civilian won't be out on the call. They will not be the one dealing with the advocate, the rape advocate, the assault advocate, the advocates from the Ys. That deputy needs to have built a relationship of trust over a lot of time with either this community, with this segment of the population, by attending neighborhood meetings, by meeting these people, so that when they're there and they walk in, they're a familiar face. And that's why I'm advocating for deputies to be the ones, and outreach doesn't just happen within the outreach unit. Everything we do, whether we're in uniform or out of uniform, we're teaching T-ball. People know that we work for the Clark County Sheriff's Office. Same thing applies when we're shopping and we run into people. They know that we're from the Clark County Sheriff's Office. The way we conduct ourselves on and off duty is outreach to our community. Part of the whole onus for me to be running for Clark County Sheriff is part of this transformation I've been going through since 2010, really, when I went through Leadership Clark County, and I realized that I'm not truly given to my community because what I'm doing, I'm getting paid to do. What matters is what I volunteered doing for my community, because even though my job is dangerous, this is what I get paid to do. And when we go out and think that we're serving the community, we're not, because we're servants. We're less than the community. We are not the most important people out in the community. We're there to serve our community. And until we each have a servant's heart and take that into every situation that we have, then our public will trust us again.
Now, moving off of this a little bit, although it's still related to accountability, related to that question of accountability. This question comes from actually within the Columbian itself. Former Deputy Don Slagle was disciplined 16 times in his 26 years with the county, and was the subject of more than a dozen internal affairs investigations. And in 1990, then Sheriff Frank Kanakoa gave him one final warning. Then Sheriff Lucas took office, and Slagle stayed with the county another 16 years until his retirement. Slagle was also the lead detective in the Alan Northrup Larry Davis case, which has come back to haunt the county. That resulted in a $10.5 million settlement for wrongful conviction. Was Gary Lucas right to keep Slagle on? And I'll start with Ed Owens on this.
How did I know you were going to start with me on that one?
No, my apologies. I can start with somebody else.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I worked with Donnie when I first came to the sheriff's office, working West Precinct nights. I think that Donnie should have left the sheriff's office long before he did. I was aware of some of his IA history. I didn't personally witness some of that, but I do believe that Donnie should have retired sooner than he did.
But should the sheriff have? Should Sheriff Lucas have disciplined him, or I don't want to say pushed him out the door, but maybe opened the door for him so he could have taken the steps himself?
Well, we can all sit here and armchair quarterback something that happened years ago when we don't have all the details and we don't have access to those files. And I personally think Donnie should have retired quite some time ago, and I can't speak to the details in those files because I have not read them.
Yeah. Well, I'll go to Shane on this. This might have been before his time at the sheriff's office, but do you have an opinion about that?
No, I worked with Donnie Slagle for a time too, and I think that when we need to hold everybody to high standards. We're Clark County Sheriff's Deputy. We're part of the oldest law enforcement agency in the state of Washington. It's a great, great honor to work here and to serve these citizens. When we do something wrong, we need to be held accountable. People always say they want to be held accountable until they're held accountable. And you're a number of 10.5 million, if I'm not mistaken, that 10.5 million was settled on with the agreement that they could come back and come after the county for more. Isn't that right? So
yeah.
And now we're in a huge deal over that, and we've lost our county is no longer part of the risk pool, and a number of fallouts that have happened. And $10.5 million would buy a lot of deputies. We need to have when you don't enforce the standards, you set new standards. And as important as each one of us puts on our uniform, is proud to put it on, we need to hold one another accountable at the lowest level. And when things start cropping up, we need to address that in progressive discipline. Obviously, there's training that has to happen first, but then after you've retrained them and something comes up again, you've got to come back and hold them accountable. For me, it's not a situation of whether or not we should have had him retire sooner. I think that there were some incidents that came up that maybe our discipline should have been harsher.
Do you have an opinion on this, John? I think you were in a leadership role at the time.
Well, yeah, but I was in internal affairs. Everybody was pretty acutely aware of the long and storied history with Mr. Slagle and his internal affairs complaints. It's difficult to second guess Sheriff Lucas's actions, going from Sheriff Canico to Sheriff Lucas, and how he would choose to deal with Don Slagle. He made a decision that he felt was right at the time, and I really don't want to second guess that. If I was put in a similar situation where I had an ongoing problem with one particular employee, you're really only faced with two options. You either do intensive retraining or you seek to terminate. But the status of labor negotiations in the real world these days, it's very difficult to terminate people unless something that they do is so egregious it simply rises to that level.
Yeah. Now, Chuck, recognizing that we are doing some Monday morning quarterbacking here, right. Looking back on it, could things have been handled differently?
Well, you're right about the Monday morning quarterbacking. Not having the details on the internal affairs files, I wasn't in IA at the time either. That the sheriff, I would hesitate to second guess his decision at that time as well. However, what I could say is I know from my years of experience with the sheriff's office, the sheriff has not been shy in imposing serious discipline to people that deserve it. And so looking back on that, not knowing all the details with Don, some officers are just a little more aggressive than others and tend to get more citizen complaints. And the number of complaints doesn't really dictate the severity of the complaint and what has happened. So, and in terms of the lawsuit, again, not having all those details or being party to that at the time, I really don't have an opinion on that.
All right. So this question actually comes. Oh, would somebody else, like John? Did you want to say something?
Well, I was just going to say that the the whole scenario with the Detective Slagle, which is what he was when he retired, fundamentally is a failure to supervise. We have to trust our people, but we also have to verify the work that they do. So the fact that Mr. Slagle was able to submit reports and that whole scenario was created and that prosecution occurred, I see that as a lack of supervision and a failure to properly supervise. So you have to have adequate checks and balances in place.
Right. This question actually comes to us from somebody who's watching this live, Eric Frank. He posted the question, what do the candidates perceive their roles to be in emergency management? And I'll start with Chuck on this.
Well, emergency management, that's a huge, that covers a lot. The sheriff is the #1 law enforcement officer in the jurisdiction. The sheriff is responsible for search and rescue. A lot of critical incidents revolve around search and rescue. So the sheriff plays a very important role in the Emergency Operations Center in terms of how it operates and how the law enforcement piece works with all the other agencies to handle that situation. So it's critical, it's vital. I do know that the sheriff's office is highly trained in incident command. We have taken the Emergency Operations Center and emergency management very serious within the agency. All of the upper administration has been trained to high levels in emergency management, and we have practiced and utilized the training that we have extensively in our community on situations that have happened here, ranging from a number of different SWAT calls, officer-involved shootings, etc., but also testing our ability to respond to the big earthquake or the natural disaster that can happen as well. So the sheriff's office, the sheriff's role is to prepare his command staff and the response staff below them to do the job that is expected of them, to provide the safety, to provide the ability for EMS and people to get into areas where they need to be, and do that in a way that works in concert with all of the other public agencies that are trying to assist the people in need at that time.
Do you happen to agree with that, John? Or do you see things differently?
Well, I don't see things necessarily differently, but fundamentally the sheriff's role is to make sure that we have adequate resources and contingency plans in place to deal with any disaster that occurs or any critical incident that occurs. When something does occur, it's now the sheriff's role to be that of a decision maker. If the people have been trained, the resources are available, the plans are in place, everything should just start working. And the sheriff's role at that point is in the EOC, so he can simply make decisions.
All right, and I'll move on to Shane. You're the only guy who is currently working for the sheriff's office. What kind of training do you have to go through right now for emergency management, and do you feel like there are weaknesses in that training, or could it be improved? And what do you think the sheriff's role is in handling an emergency situation like an earthquake?
If an emergency happens within our community, it doesn't matter whether it's a large structure fire, an earthquake, Mount St. Helens erupting again, the sheriff's office is going to play a role in figuring out our way. And like both John and Chuck have said, we do have incident command system that we are all trained in, the ICS system. We do have the EOC. We are ready for these situations, but more importantly, one of the things that we need to do is we need to reach out. Vancouver Police has done an excellent job growing their NOW program, and we're trying to grow our NOW program as well, but we have these volunteers that work part-time at the sheriff's office, build a relationship with us, and then each one of them goes out and talks to their neighbors. So we either have CERT people that are working within our agencies and our groups that are training other people to be prepared so that they have water on hand, so that they know that they have somebody that's housebound that lives within their street, so they can go check on that person if there's because the sheriff's office is going to be handling along with the fire and AMR, we're going to be handling the large areas, and we won't be in the residential areas. So we, with our Neighbors on Watch, with the CERT programs, with other organizations in the community that are ready to step up, we need to work with them, but all these relationships need to be built now during the calm, and it'll be the responsibility of this new administration that comes in to go over to the EOC and get spun up on everything and build those relationships, know what those phone numbers are, know what MOUs we have in place with other local agencies, so that when the flag goes up, we don't have to build those relationships at that time.
Yeah, I imagine partnerships will be really important. Ed, would you like to add anything?
I would. Emergency management is critical. I got into emergency management in 1995 up in Olympia, and working with the state EEOC at Camp Murray. I'm a FEMA instructor for about a dozen different topics, including an instructor for ICS, a CERT instructor, and a bunch of other ones. So emergency management is something that the sheriff has to have a critical, in-depth understanding about. We play a vital role here in our county, but we also play a vital role throughout Southwest Washington. We have existing agreements with the Portland area, and understanding those and understanding the dynamics that go back to how we establish those relationships, how we continue to practice and always improve upon our plans. You know, years ago when I was on the Law Enforcement Council, one of the ones we created and worked a lot on was the SNS, the Strategic National Stockpile. And how would we implement that within our community? How would we bring those resources here in the event of either a natural disaster or, worst case scenario, a terrorism incident? So having somebody in that position that understands those dynamics, that has worked on those issues at a regional and state level is critical. We are a very important role with the national resources we have here in Southwest Washington. Absolutely. We have got to make sure we stay on top of this.
I couldn't agree more on that, Tyler. And what I'd like to say to that as well is I think the Sheriff's Office has done an amazing job over the years in preparation for the national disasters that could occur here. And having been within the agency for my 35 years of current time, 2 years ago, any natural disaster that would have occurred, I would have been one of the people sitting in that room that has the training already, and we, the entire administrative staff has been well trained in that and well practiced. And so of all the questions we've had today here, I think this is the one that clearly shows that the sheriff has prepared the agency well, and whoever steps in and takes over that role can stand on his shoulders and push it forward, because it is in good stead at this point.
All right, and this will be the last question, actually. We have about 8-9 minutes left, and it comes via email again, and it's from Mary Elkin. She's the PTO president of Endeavor Elementary School, and her question is, how can we best keep our kids safe? She's a parent of a third grader within the Evergreen School District, and I think this speaks to the shooting that took place at Reynolds High School over in Troutdale, Oregon this week. And I'll add to this a little bit. Do you think there's a need for more school resource officers, and is there a need to have a more open discussion about gun violence in the community? And I'll start with Shane on this.
It's a tough nut to crack. That, you know, we have people that want to say that access to guns is what causes this, but for every shooting that occurs like this, there are thousands of homes out there with guns in them that children aren't grabbing their parents' guns and going and shooting up a school. School resource officers, we had at Reynolds School, there were 2 school resource officers on the campus at the moment that this happened. And even listening to the dispatch tape, still a child lost his life. And our schools, my wife is a school teacher, our schools are places for education. They're not built to be Fort Knox. And I would encourage all law enforcement to stop by schools on recess and play with the kids, and because that normalizes the police present with children anyways, and shows that we're not just around when emergencies happen, but we're people inside these uniforms trying to help people all the time. And maybe seeing law enforcement presence at schools more frequently would divert somebody from using that as an area to pick easy targets. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we have a lot of mental health issues. We have to reach out. I was looking at the news today, and I saw that the parents of the young man that took that assault rifle in the school are very distraught themselves. They're beside themselves. They can't understand. They can't believe that it happened. I'm not going to throw stones at them and say that they're bad parents, but we have people in our community that make a decision that they're going to do these things, and we all need to have our finger on the pulse of our friends. That's mentoring is important. Friendship is important. Building relationships, watching for people that are acting different so that we can try to divert these things. Some of our biggest school shooters have left manifestos and diaries, and people have come back later and said, oh yeah, they did mention this, or they did say that, or they did have law enforcement contact. But we have to respect individuals' rights, and training is all we can do. Run, hide, fight for the teachers. We can have more of a law enforcement presence, but that doesn't mean that somebody doesn't see a cop there and go to the next school. We have to hug our kids. We have to love our kids. We have to be a part and in touch with them and know what they're thinking. We have to lock up our weapons at home and keep them out of children's hands. We have to be responsible with them. And hopefully, if we do all that, we'll see a downturn. Maybe if the media doesn't make such a big deal every time one of these happens, people won't get the attention that they want when they do these things. It's a difficult scenario. And my wife being in the school and having two young kids myself that are in 6th grade and 3rd grade, it's a question that's near and dear to my heart.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Shane. I'll move on to John. Is there something you'd like to add to that? I mean, do you believe that there should be more school resource officers, or are there other ways that maybe the sheriff's office or even other police agencies can keep our kids safe?
Well, sure. Let me directly answer the question. Sure, I believe in community engagement. I believe in mental health programs in the community and so forth. But the question, as I understand it, is what can we do to keep our kids safe in schools? Mm-hmm. First of all, I do not support arming teachers in schools. I do embrace the adopted policies of the school districts of the run, hide, and fight. What I think we should do is use architectural modifications to harden our schools to deny entry in the first place. Criminals are opportunists. I think we need to keep them out of the buildings in the first place. The second thing I would do is set up a crisis alarm system within the schools, either a personal alarm that every teacher can have on a lanyard around their neck where they can simply push a button to summon the police, or every place that you have a red fire call box, you have a blue crisis box sitting next to it to get more rapid response. But my approach would be to harden the schools, deny entry in the first place, provide for the panic alarms, and educate our people. I do support additional school resource officers. I would like to have a school resource officer in every school. They're an excellent role model for our youth, as well as providing a measure of security for the school itself.
And Ed, what do you think about that?
Well, there's a lot of things going on with the incident that just took place in Troutdale, and this is part of a larger discussion we do need to have in this county. That incident down there, it started and it was rapidly over, in large part because there were school resource officers present, and we can't always stop what happens. We can harden our targets, and I agree we should, but that is never going to stop a motivated offender who wants to get into a situation. From what I understand, he brought those weapons in a guitar case on the bus, and he entered the school with them. If someone's motivated and they want to engage in that type of violence, there's not much we can do to stop that. We can do the best we can to prevent it. On school resource officers specifically, I've spent a lot of time talking. I think we missed the mark in law enforcement. We have school resource officers in our high schools, but when kids developmentally start engaging in risk-taking behaviors, they start developmentally getting in on the different trajectories in life in which they start making those decisions, whether it's involved in drugs, gangs, violence, is in the middle school years, and we have our SROs in our high schools. I think if we do more and a better job of mentoring our youth developmentally in the middle schools, have those relationships, we can do everything else. But we have got to focus some of our efforts there. As a coach and a mentor in our schools, I know that you can work with the kids and you can make great strides and really improve the quality of their life. And I think we need to shift some of our focuses, work with our schools, work with our teachers, and do everything we can. But recognize if somebody really is motivated, we can try and just minimize the damage they're going to create.
All right. And Chuck, would you like to weigh in? Are there things that the Sheriff's Office could do, or are there limitations that would prevent the Sheriff's Office from having more of a role than maybe it already has in keeping kids safe at school?
Well, certainly the school resource officers are a high priority to me. I think they're worth their weight in gold for many reasons, and it's not just for the gun on the campus that's going to stop the active shooter, because typically that isn't what is going to happen. They're going to be reactive. But more importantly, we've talked, throughout this about the suppression side of law enforcement, and we're very good at that. But the intervention and prevention side is critical as well, and that's really where the sheriff can stand out, is providing a safe environment in the school where kids want to be safe. I was part of the group that started the SRO program as a sergeant and negotiated the contracts with the schools, getting law enforcement in inside of the school community where we weren't really embraced for a long time. And what they were able to quickly determine was, with police in the school, once the kids got used to them, they realized that this is somebody we can go to with information that keeps us safe. Kids want to be safe in their schools. They want an environment where they can learn, where they can interact, where they can socialize, and where they can grow as human beings. And so when they are our best eyes in the school, and when they see a police officer there that they can trust, then they come to them with the information about so-and-so's got a gun, so-and-so's doing drugs, so-and-so's talking suicide, so-and-so's doing whatever. They come to that officer, and that's the true role of the SRO, is to be a support to those kids within that school. So as staffing allows, and as our transitional time here in Clark County leads us back to a point where we can add additional staff, I would love to have, as John said, an SRO in every school. I think they're, like I said before, they're worth their weight in gold.
Excellent. Well, I think we'll leave it there, guys. I think you've said it all. Actually, I'm sure you have plenty more to say, and you'll have plenty more opportunities to communicate with the public and to talk with people. Thanks again for taking the time to come out here and do this. This was an interesting experiment, and hopefully we'll have more opportunities to do things like this in the future. So again, thanks a lot, guys.
Well, thank you, Tyler, for the invite.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you all my opponents as well.
Take care.